Ukraine and the European Union signed an absolutely historic agreement that is supposed to stand up to the Russian Federation. According to the agreement in question, there will be Ukrainian troops, yes, but also European Union troops, directly on the country's territory. This has already been signed directly by Volodymyr Zelensky and the European leaders. Moscow hasn't said much about it yet, but the key issue in all of this is the purpose of these troops, which is very likely not at all what you would expect. I hope you stay until the end of this video because you will probably be amazed by what they just signed and who they signed it against. Here is where the leaders are, the great ones of the free world, Volodymyr Zelensky, Emmanuel Macron, and the rest, signing the historic document according to which Ukraine will have this military contingent from the European Union directly on its territory. Oh my God. It turns out that the billion times the Russian Federation has repeated that this simply could not happen, they have not been heard. It's been something like, look, Russia has said that we cannot have NATO or European Union military contingents on the territory of Ukraine. Oh, yeah? Well, let's start thinking of something else. Wait, I just came up with a really good one. And why don't we deploy our military contingent, from the countries of the European Union, right on Ukrainian territory? Great idea. Let's propose it to Zelensky and see if we can sign it. This is something like having a memory like a goldfish. I think they could even write a book with that same title. However, what I find most interesting about all this and what the Western media won't tell you is this. Most likely, I haven't seen any analysts talking about this yet, especially not in Spanish, in these same terms. Who is this military contingent really targeting? Let's be clear. Mama Sivaya has arrived to explain things that seem to escape many people, especially those on the NATO side of the story. It turns out that the military contingent they are planning for Ukraine right now is about 10,000 soldiers. It seems that the majority will be provided by Great Britain and another part by France. It's true that they were there, that if they go in, if they leave, if they don't, a lot of people end up getting involved, and with good reason. He said that it's one thing to talk about, indeed, placing this military contingent directly on the doorstep of the Russian Federation, and another thing to actually do it. Whatever they sign, it's worthless. Not even worth a damn. Relax, it's absolutely nothing. The attempts, however, are still there, and now they've even been made official on paper from somewhere. Sources. This has been seen as yet another attempt to escalate the tension, raise the level of the Ukrainian conflict, take it to the maximum confrontation, practically to the terms of World War III. However, here we have to highlight a question that, for me, is the million-dollar question. These 10,000 soldiers are mostly going to be British and French. Who exactly are they standing against on Ukrainian territory? Against Russia or not? Because, of course, against the Russian Federation? As long as they don't do much, the plan, let me remind you, is for them to be in Ukraine, and the first line will still be Ukrainian soldiers. This is being discussed for when there is a peace agreement, and having previously emphasized this on my part, well, this has already been said and repeated in Russia. The fact that the Russian Federation has said there will be no peace agreement, if the European Union considers sending peacekeepers, that is, what they just signed, actually eliminates any possibility of a peace agreement. But come on, let's suppose that Russia actually overlooks it and says there will be a peace agreement. And after the peace agreement, once it's signed, indeed, these guys decide to station their troops in Ukraine. Or, well, now, with this on paper, just having it as a project, what's the goal? The goal of the project? Because let's be clear, 10,000 soldiers, whether they're British, French, or American, which are very popular lately, are nothing. Stuck on a stick. Against the military contingent that Russia maintains in Ukrainian territory, 10,000 soldiers in general do absolutely nothing in such a large area. They are indeed intended to provide support, that is, to support the Ukrainian army. However, they will be able to provide little support, being only 10,000. In the event of a conflict, if the conflict doesn't happen, it's unclear what they're there for. If the conflict does happen, well, they won't do anything at all. And we'll still have to see what the reaction of the Western countries will be. If this military contingent, which Russia has already said repeatedly will be a legitimate target, as soon as they set foot on Ukrainian territory, suddenly a Skander or a Kinjang hits them. The most important point, I repeat, is that we are reconstructing it piece by piece. And we return once again to the million-dollar question. If the 10,000 soldiers coming from the European Union can hardly do anything against the military contingent of the Russian Federation that is currently in Ukrainian territory, so who are they there against? Because, of course, they have to fight someone, and this is where the opposing side comes in. I'll leave my personal theory, which will most likely end up surprising more than one person. I honestly believe that these guys are not in Ukrainian territory to fight against Russia, but to fight against Ukraine itself, or rather to control Ukraine itself. Here we need to discuss several factors. The fact that the Kiev regime is probably one of the most corrupt internationally right now. This is no surprise to absolutely anyone. The fact that Volodymyr Zelensky is finding it increasingly difficult to control the entire country, and he is suffering under the influence of many groups at the same time, including ultranationalist groups. So, in order to somehow try to guarantee Ukraine at least a minimum level of stability, perhaps indeed, it would be necessary to deploy some soldiers who are not Ukrainian and who do not actually respond to the orders of the Kiev regime. A third point could be to directly control the Kiev regime, which is by no means a minor thing, as Mariana Rajoy would say. It's a major thing. So, in other words, it's not a minor thing. In other words, it's a major thing. And on the other hand, of course, the huge amount of aid that will still be coming to Ukraine in terms of money for recovery also has to be controlled by someone. And on top of all this, in case it didn't seem like enough, there's the detail that Western media doesn't seem to remember very much, which is that since the beginning of the special military operation, a huge amount of weapons has been given to the Ukrainian population. And now we are facing a very likely situation as a consequence of the signing of peace, as a consequence of the conflict being resolved, that a society absolutely full of weapons, which in many cases cannot be clearly traced. In addition to facing this at home, it will receive more than 1 million men if that's the case, and indeed they will have survived. But let's set a minimum of 500,000 Ukrainian soldiers who have had a very hard time, many of whom will probably come back with some after effects, whether in the form of wounds, post-traumatic stress, or both. That is the situation they could be in at the end of this whole military operation. The picture is going to be absolutely tragic, of course. These people have practically free access because in Ukraine now, these weapons can't be controlled for the most part. And also Western weapons, in some cases even from NATO itself, from the leading NATO countries, which includes all the bad image that could be given about the conflict, about the help that has been provided within the conflict. But that's not all. I mean, we have what is basically a staged situation, and within this staging, these are people who, of course, have fought. Most likely they had a really hard time. Most likely they came back with some kind of after effect, with some kind of consequence. What do you think their opinion of the Kiev regime will be? What do you think their opinion of the European Union will be? How eager will they be to go out and talk about it? Either of you? They might shoot or shout from rooftops, but how many will actually follow through? How many will want to organize themselves into some kind of armed groups? Criminals, they end up turning from soldiers into criminals because they don't have resources. I remind you that the Ukrainian state right now is practically broke. It's being artificially maintained by the West. So, if we put all this together suddenly, the military contingent of the 10,000 soldiers that the European Union is supposedly considering sending. Well, maybe this is revealing some very interesting things to us, And maybe, in fact, they actually plan for it to be there. Yes, but not to be there against the Russian Federation, but rather to be there in favor of the interests of the European Union and to try to control, even if just a little, the situation within Ukraine itself and secure their interests there. I come back to exactly the same point, which is ultimately the most important thing for the European Union. Within the country, we're not even talking about the arrival case anymore. When the time comes, Ukraine could end up falling and disappearing as a state. And then these military forces could secure the passage through the different territories and their subsequent annexation, whether it's Poland, whether it's Hungary. Resource management at that time, too. In short, yes, this is something the Russian Federation will not accept. And here we are analyzing in terms of possible futures because I think earlier, Russia ends up reaching Kiev, which allows Ukraine to take the step of placing this Union military contingent on its territory. But when the time comes, given the situation, we could return to this possible future where the European Union ends up carrying this out, but then nearly certainly. It wouldn't be in that territory of Ukraine to threaten or to guarantee absolutely anything to the Russian Federation, much less against the Russian Federation, but to secure the situation for their own benefit, first of all, and therefore almost certainly against the interests of the Ukrainian nation.